To the Point.
Good morning and welcome to the Point. I'm Michael Williams. Kelly Dunn is off today. We are living in an America of changing faces and voices, and Palm Beach County is a prime example of the increasing diversity that is redefining us. The new U.S. Census numbers tell us the story. Non-Hispanic whites now make up 60% of the county's population. That's down more than 10% from the turn of the century. The Hispanic population is booming. Hispanics now account for 19% of Palm Beach County's residents, 1.3 million of us now. That compares to 12% in the year 2000, a 78% rise in the number of Hispanic residents over just 10 years. The non-Hispanic black population also on the rise sharply to 17% of the population, up from just under 14% 10 years ago. That's a roughly 45% rise in the number of non-Hispanic black residents in Palm Beach County. Now, joining me to discuss the numbers this morning and what they mean, my guest, Leah Gaines. She's the president of the West Palm Beach branch of the NAACP. We thank you very much for being here.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Let's first of all talk about where the growth's coming from. In terms of non-Hispanic black residents, where do you see the growth happening? Where is it coming from?
The growth is coming from two directions, but primarily there's an in-migration or reverse migration from the northeast to the south. Nationally, they've been monitoring this since about 1970s, but the complete reversal now we see is a real true in-migration back to the south for blacks. And for South Florida, we have the impact of the in-migration from the north, but we also have the migration from the south, from the Caribbean.
I was going to ask you, how impactful is that Caribbean migration into South Florida?
It's relatively significant here in South Florida.
Talk about now, we see the growth in the non-Hispanic black community, certainly in the Hispanic community. So let's talk a little bit about what that means economically and politically. Have you translated it in the last 10 years into more political and economic power? Let's first talk politically. Where have you seen the translation or lack therein so far?
Well, I said the other day when I was interviewed about this subject matter that policy hasn't kept up with population growth here for minorities, for African Americans and Hispanics here in Palm Beach County.
How so?
For example, we've got a 45% growth increase, but we're seeing more and more people suffering. And it's very important because the formulas that are developed as a result of the census numbers are supposed to channel and redistribute those resources back here based on population. And I'm not sure that those resources are getting to the constituencies in need.
Are we seeing enough non-Hispanic black faces, in your mind, proportional to the rise in the population in elective office, too? Or do you think we're still behind the curve, at least in your estimation?
We're a little behind the curve, and it's not actually tantamount to seeing the black face. While that sure is an indication, what's really more important is whether or not that person or that voice is representing the true voice and desires of that voting population. So it's not necessarily the race of the individual, but really how responsive and how accountable they've been to that population group.
Do you feel comfortable in that regard, then, politically, as you look at the great broad sweep of Palm Beach County?
No, I don't.
Talk about why not.
Well, again, we just see unemployment in the predominantly black and underserved areas have increased. And as we know, in certain neighborhoods of the city of West Palm Beach, for example, that rate can go as high as 30%, between 20 and 30%. And so that has been lagging. That, of course, has impacted crime and public safety in terms of the amenities and cultural opportunities that are available for people. Of course, if you have a diverse population, there should be a diverse range of cultural amenities and choices to choose from, and we don't really see a lot of that here in Palm Beach County.
There are no easy answers. We're certainly not going to have them all today in this broadcast. But where are the beginnings of the answers that move us forward? Let's first talk economically. Go back to that.
Well, I'm hopeful that out of this reverse migration back to the south, that there'll be a skill set that will be coming in with these new population groups. In fact, the Brookings Institute, a think tank out of Washington, D.C. area, has looked at those population groups specifically. And as opposed to the initial migration that occurred around 1910, where people were pretty much tradesmen and they were semi-skilled laborers, they're seeing the in-migration coming back as people who are professionally trained with college degrees. And so I'm hoping that with that kind of knowledge base and skill base, that those talents and skills will translate into a little bit more progress here in this area.
Do you feel the economic and political foundations need to be reshaped in a sense to achieve that goal? Do you feel we're making progress there?
In some areas, I think we have created some methods of election, some opportunities to elect individuals of choice for African Americans and Hispanics. But I think it's a twofold question. In some areas that has not happened. For example, with the city of West Palm Beach, there were single-member districts at one time, and then there was an initiative petition that reversed that. And so I think that we need to get back to single-member districting in some areas, but I also think that the responsibility is with us, the electorate, to become more knowledgeable, more informed, and more intentional about voting and about the political process.
Is the economic pie big enough, especially in these times where we're still coming out of a recession? We've been out of it officially for a while, but that's hard to tell. Some people are still feeling its impact very severely. Is the economic pie big enough to go around right now?
That's a difficult question to answer. I think we have to make the pie large enough, and we do have to share in the pie. But I think there are some emerging markets that South Florida may be able to tap into, particularly the state of Florida, in terms of green and renewable energy initiatives that will create a pie absolutely large enough for everyone. Ms.
Gaines, let me ask you one question. Whenever minorities are on the rise in any community, and historically in this country, whether it was the Irish in Boston or Italians, you name it, there's a dislocation as that begins to happen. You begin to see the trends as minorities are on the rise in terms of the proportion of the population here. What about concerns about making sure that that works seamlessly with Hispanics and with the non-Hispanic white community? What are the concerns you have there or have seen? How do we move forward there?
Well, you're talking about the out-migration
of... Well, I think any ethnic group, and I was only naming two, by the way, but as you see ethnic groups grow in the proportion of the population, sometimes that's not a seamless transition.
You're absolutely right.
There's friction. We've seen that sometimes to the south in Broward and Miami-Dade counties. How do we work with that? Where do you say we are now? Where do you see us going? And how do we get there to make sure it is more seamless for Palm Beach County in the decade and decades ahead?
Yes, well, for example, what the NAACP has done, for example, in education, we've looked at, how do you come up with a curriculum that everyone can respond to? How do you reach in and tap into the various learning styles of different cultural and ethnic background individuals? And so we've been pushing for what we call the infusion of the African American curriculum into the subject matters, no matter what the subject matter is in the school district, so that every child can feel a part of, can see his and her contribution throughout history across all of the disciplines and the subject matters. The same with the Latino population as well. The same as women's studies. We've been really advocating for the integration of that kind of a curriculum. That's in education, for example. On the policy sides, we've been advocating and helping to convene workshops regarding undoing racism, institutional racism, so that people can come together in a non-threatening way to really take a look at what are some things that we can do differently to make sure that every ethnic and racial group is included. So you're absolutely right. It's not always a seamless transition. There's always an opportunity or an incident of conflict, but those are things that we have to remain proactive about in that regard.
Economically, what tri-ethnic efforts are there underway to try and make that more seamless and to make sure we're talking to each other and not just talking within our ethnic group as we become a more diverse county and diverse South Florida and, for that matter, nation?
Well, I think all racial and ethnic groups need to see the value in population groups in terms of attracting customers. But, for example, to be honest with you and be frank with you, Hispanics know how to attract their customer base, and I would hope that all population groups would see the value in attracting cross-population groups, because the more you can attract, the more money you can make, and the more economically viable all of our communities will be. But it doesn't mean that you can't find your niche. There's enough for everybody for that niche, and I think the influx of the various population groups gives that more of an opportunity to happen.
Are these two growing communities, the Hispanic and non-Hispanic black community, talking avidly and often in official and unofficial ways here as they become a bigger part of this county?
Probably not enough. but I certainly would look forward to that kind of dialogue. I know many of the individuals that are involved in many of the Hispanic human service organizations around Palm Beach County, and we have coalesced on a variety of educational topics, but we probably need to do that more cross-culturally and economically as well.
Conversation begins in places like this. Leah Gaines, president of the West Palm Beach branch of the NAACP. We thank you so much for sharing your insights with us this day. And coming up next, only 4 months after the midterm congressional elections, a well-known mayor announces she's running for Congress and takes her first mild swipe, at least for now, at the incumbent. Our political roundtable examines the race next. Stay with us. After 2 terms, she could not run again, so she's leaving her job as West Palm Beach mayor this coming week. Lois Frankel already has her sights, though, on Allen West. She wants the Republicans' District 22 seat in Congress.
I think he's been busy with some national politics and talk radio shows, and I think he needs to pay more attention to the jobs back home.
I talked to Allen West this week. He did not directly return the jab. He said, I don't want to talk politics now. I want to serve the constituents, but the gloves will come off soon enough. Of that, you can be sure. The election may be 20 months away, but it's already shaping up as one of the big contests for Congress that will gain national attention. Joining me now to discuss this and other political topics, political analyst and author of the Crowley Political Report, Brian Crowley. We thank you for being with us. And George Bennett, the political reporter for the Palm Beach Post. Gentlemen, let's take it away. West Frankel, and we should add we already have another candidate who's joined that District 22 race, but certainly at the moment she's the highest profile Democrat to be there. Kind of size that up, even if it is 20 months away. Never too soon to talk politics.
Oh, it's a very big race. Lois is a very, very tough campaigner. She's going to have to prove over the next 6-7 months that she can raise some money. The Democrats are very interested in winning this seat back. They've already run commercials against Allen West on the radio. And the Republicans obviously dearly would like to hold on to Allen West, who has proven in a very short period of time not only to be popular in Palm Beach County, but to be starting to have somewhat of a national stature as well.
George?
Yeah, he's definitely a national figure and with a following on YouTube, and he seems to be on cable TV all the time. But on the other hand, this past week, I mean, he did a couple of town halls that had 300 or 400 people at them. So he has, early on, he's certainly been spending a lot of time in the districts. He's he's not only a national figure.
Well, let me ask you, people say, why do you announce 20 months early? Certainly the fundraising is going to be critical for her. He's going to have national Republicans come in. They're going to do everything they can to protect his seat, which is going to be redrawn. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But talk about advantages for her starting early, George, and also disadvantages because she's going to go up against a well-financed incumbent.
The advantage is, as you mentioned, in fundraising, and I think also to ward off other potential Democrats that might be thinking about getting in. Already, Ron Klein, I guess, has said that he's not going to run next year. Not a huge surprise there. But having someone of Frankel's stature in the race would probably deter other Democrats that might be entertaining thoughts or force them to make a decision soon.
Policy-wise, has she amplified her positions enough at this point or at any point in her 2 terms in mayor in your mind as you now look at a bigger playing field, District 22? I mean, give me the sense of how she's going to have to talk about those issues. We'll talk a little bit more about Allen West, but this is going to be a clearly delineated race. Where do you see that shaping up for her in terms of policy and how she sells that to the electorate next year?
Before she became mayor, her reputation was largely built on social issues. I think that you will see that now, her 8 years of mayor, she will try to point to what she believes are the big successes in West Palm Beach, how she's helped improve the economy and the job situation in West Palm Beach, and I think in that she'll use that to try to show that she's got the business credentials that make her more than just a social issues candidate, don't you think?
Yeah, and I think also the fact that the mayor's job is nonpartisan. I mean, she remains, kind of a polarizing figure to a lot of people, but it was, as mayor, it was in a nonpartisan context. I mean, before she was mayor, she was, a very partisan liberal Democrat. Probably as much so as West is a Republican, and so, but a lot of that edge has been taken off by the fact she's been nonpartisan mayor for 8 years.
Healthcare, big issue that helped shape the midterm elections. When I asked her about it this week, she said, I don't have an answer on how I would have voted had I been in Congress. He's going to press her for one next year. We clearly know where Allen West stands on the issue. He'd like him to scratch and start over on healthcare. Talk about those issues as we define this campaign next year. It's going to come down to a lot of these issues, and I would have to imagine on her side, hope that if the president's doing better in the polls, she can ride those coattails in a district that, as it's currently constituted, is still, I think, a little bit more Democratic-leaning than Republican. But against all that, still long odds. But shape that up and kind of size up the horse race.
I think that if you're running against Allen West, the one thing you cannot do on any issue is equivocate. Mm-hmm. And her hesitation, from Allen West, you get a clear, direct answer, period. He tells you exactly how he feels on an issue. He doesn't pull any punches. And that can be a really stark contrast to somebody who equivocates on the issue. So while it's not a misstep in any sense this early in the campaign, I think one of the things that Lois will have to do very quickly is show that she can come back at Allen West with very clear, direct answers to questions. Answering the healthcare question with an answer that says, I don't know, is not a very good answer at this stage.
Yeah, she punted on the stimulus too when I asked her about it, and on, I said, what's your general approach to reducing the deficit, and she didn't want to give an answer to that. Yeah, it's fine on the first day, but you can't get away with that, especially as a Democratic candidate. I mean, the DCCC is already, that's the Democratic National.
Right.
They've already invested money attacking Allen West on health care and stuff like that. So, if she were to take a position different from that, which is possible, but I mean, she needs to stake out a position on stuff like that if she's going to go against the national party.
Just very, very quickly, George, we're going to go to our break. How long or how short are the odds for her in 2012 against a well-financed incumbent?
Well, I presume she would be well-financed as well. I think a lot of it depends on the national climate. We saw that this last election. Who knows a year and a half from now what the climate will be like, so I wouldn't want to give odds. Yeah, gentlemen, stay with us. 20 months out, the odds will be changing a lot in a lot of races. We'll be right back as we talk to our political experts here, and stay with us. To the Point, coming back in just a moment. We began with the census, and now we have one more set of census figures for you. Florida will be adding 2 congressional districts. New York loses 2. For comparison, Florida and New York are now equal in Congress with 27 representatives. As we move to redistricting, the question is, where will they be added in Florida? The political maneuvering begins this summer when new boundaries begin to be discussed, and Republicans will be in charge or are in charge of the legislature and the governor's mansion. That means they'll be driving the process, but voters in November approved the Fair District Amendment. So, George, how do you see all this playing out as we redistrict Florida, and what's it mean here to our constituents in Palm Beach and the Treasure Coast? I genuinely, redistricting is the quintessential, most political process there is. Right. But now that you've added this fair districts thing, I don't know how that will actually work out in practice. I'm genuinely curious. Palm Beach County, overall, it grew roughly the same amount as the state, so theoretically the overall amount of clout Palm Beach County has in Tallahassee and Washington shouldn't change, but as far as where the lines go, I'm really not sure. Before we get to our affectionately tabbed Crowley closer, one last thought from you, George. How do you see the change in the census figures and the increasing diversity? It's going to be interesting how in the next couple of years and decade that plays out in terms of what happens politically in this community. Yeah, no question. Right now Palm Beach County has one minority-dominated seat represented by Alcee Hastings. Probably the absolute number of congressional seats won't change, at least in the short term, but it's growing influence of minority voters here. Brian, I'm teasing ahead to your closer, which one of my colleagues was chuckling that you've got your own name for the closing segment. But on this topic, before we go to break and wrap things up in a few moments, your thoughts on these changing census numbers and also the redistricting. Add your thoughts to the play. It's going to be one tough, nasty battle. Well, look, a couple of things. There's been a significant increase in the number of Hispanics living in Palm Beach County, to use that Palm Beach County as an example. But the next question is, how many of those Hispanics are eligible voters, and how much impact will they then have in the coming elections? Mm-hmm. Because a lot of the Hispanics in this population census are under 18. A number of the Hispanics will be immigrants who are not citizens and not able to vote. So we don't yet know the exact impact that the Hispanic, we know it will be more, but we don't know the exact number on that yet. Thank you very much, gentlemen, and we will be back in just a moment. Stay with us.
Part-time Palm Beach resident and possible presidential candidate Donald Trump said this week he wants President Obama to reveal his birth certificate. The issue never goes away. Will he get any political points for this? Our Crowley closer.
Well, I think that Donald Trump is brilliant at building buildings. Beyond that, I don't think he's very smart at all. I mean, this is just a silly question. If anybody believes that Republican operatives were not going over every inch of Barack Obama's life during that campaign, if they found something that said he was not a citizen of this country, I think they would have mentioned it.
We'll let you and the Donald duke it out, gentlemen. As always, we thank you very much for your time. We thank you, as always, for spending time with us on today's To The Point. And if you'd like to send us a comment about today's broadcast, go to WPTV.com and click on the political link. Enjoy the rest of your day and have a great week. Good day, everyone.